Welcome to the Hope After Child Loss podcast, where we endeavor to offer stories of hope to grieving parents and siblings so that they might rediscover life filled with meaning, purpose, and hope. We invite you to come and join us. Hey guys, so glad you could join us today. I'm your host, Greg Buffkin, and my guests today are Cory and Heather Wessman. And they're here to share the story about their son, Micah. So, Cory and Heather, welcome to the podcast episode today. It's good to have you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, Greg.
Absolutely. Well, guys, why don't you take a few minutes and just tell us about yourselves?
Yes. Heather and I are in southwest Minneapolis in Minnesota. We have 4 children. Micah, our son, who passed away in 2009. We have 3 living children, Owen, Brendan, and Kinsley, and their ages 13, 11, and 10. Try to get that right there. 13, 11, and 10. So we've got a blessed and busy household.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And sometimes it is harder for us dads to remember all those numbers, isn't it? Moms never get those wrong.
Right.
Yeah.
So how about you, Heather? Is anything you'd like to tell us about you?
I'm actually working at my kids' school right now in a private school in Edina.
Yeah.
And I enjoy being able to be with my kiddos all day and just feel like it's a joy to be able to be in the midst of their education and their spiritual formation. Even at school.
Wow, that is a blessing. Well, guys, I'm always interested when I'm interviewing a couple about how you guys met. So why don't you take a minute and just tell us a little bit about that? You don't have to go into any more detail than you want to, but I think it just helps people to connect better sometimes.
Well, this will be a similar response to the previous question in the sense I will look at my wife here and answering this question to see if I get it right. So I describe it as being as meeting. This is the Lord's plan, but meeting 2 ways at once. I had a friend who I was in a Bible study with, and his wife would host a women's Bible study, and Heather was in that women's Bible study. My friend would tell me about this single woman in the Bible study and that I would need to meet her. The issue is, like a good male, he had her name wrong. So we didn't have quite the name right. At the same time, we were matched up on eHarmony, the dating online dating service, and we were matched up and planned to go out on a date around the same time. And had my friend had the name right, we would have put 2 and 2 together sooner than we did. But as it turned out, we figured it out after that first blind date, and then met and then married pretty quickly after that first date.
Heather, would you corroborate that story?
Yes, that is correct. You got it right.
So what was your previous name, Heather?
Heather Anloff.
Yeah. And what?
Good German name.
Oh yeah. And so what was the name that was incorrect at the beginning?
It was a first
name.
Yeah, he had called me like Anna or something else.
Yes. Yeah.
And if we would have known each other's right names, we would have been communicating on eHarmony together. Maybe figured it out. So It was just kind of funny. We figured it out afterwards.
Yeah. Good start, Cory.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, guys, thanks for sharing that. And why don't we I'm just going to let you guys go ahead and pick up from here and share the story of your son, Micah, and the journey that put you guys on afterwards. And we'll go from there.
So Micah was just about to turn 9 months old, and it was the end of July. And he was just a totally true blessing to us as our first child. We had gone through some fertility issues and miscarriages. So he was just our bundle of joy. A day in July, he had actually taken a fall. And along with that fall, he when babies cry, they kind of suck in their air, and he had just previously eaten lunch, some little finger foods. And when he cried, he kind of sucked in air. And at that time, we didn't know what he had done, that he had actually aspirated food onto his lung with the cry. So he had a little bump on his head, and I brought him down to Children's Hospital here in Minneapolis. And that first visit was more of kind of questioning me and wondering, how did he fall and why does he have a bump on his head? But evaluated him, determined that he seemed just fine. But I noticed in that time that he had developed a kind of a strange cough right after the fall. It was almost like a seal bark. And the nurse had heard it and thought it was interesting, but nothing was addressed with that. So we went home, and we're just grateful that everything checked out okay and that he was fine. And then that next day he woke up and he had a pretty decent fever, and that strange cough continued throughout that day. So I decided to bring him back to the ER that evening, and he got evaluated, and they determined he had a fever and that he likely had aspirated food and had pneumonia. So within that 24-hour period, developed pneumonia. So we ended up staying just in the ER for a few hours and got some IV antibiotics for him. And we're assured that everything was fine, that this antibiotic will take effect right away, and that tomorrow we should follow up with our pediatrician and just get a follow-up shot of some more antibiotics just to be on top of it. So we brought him home late that night, and then made an appointment early the next morning to see the pediatrician just to get checked out and to get another shot of that antibiotic. So we went in and did that, and the doctor just kind of followed the protocol of what the ER doctor had said of getting that shot. And it was interesting because I just felt really reluctant to leave that doctor on that Saturday morning, just because, I don't know, I just felt like something wasn't quite right. And I remember saying to our pediatrician, what if something bad happens? Or what if we miss something? Yeah. And she just looked at me and she said, Heather, we've done all we can do. He's going to be fine. If anything else happens, contact me on Monday and we'll see him again. So I rest assured, and we went home. He had gotten that shot, thought he was really improving, hopefully. And so went on as normal. I'd gotten up on Sunday the next day, and Cory had gone to Target to go get his oral antibiotic, because now they were going to give him some oral antibiotics just to make sure that pneumonia was under control.
Sure.
And Micah went down for a little nap before we went to church that morning. And I had gotten out of the shower, and on the monitor, I just had heard something strange. And so I went into Micah's room, and that's when I found him struggling to breathe. And I picked him up immediately. He stopped breathing in my arms and went limp. So I just kind of went frantic, called 911 immediately, laid him on the floor, and started CPR with the instructions of the 911 person. Yeah. And at that time, Cory had just pulled up from Target, and I was still just frantic, just trying to get him to breathe. And I had gone through CPR training and worked in healthcare myself, so I knew what I was doing per se, and just didn't seem like anything was working. So I remember just yelling at Cory to get in, that saying out loud, "He stopped breathing. Help! Like, I need help." So I continued on with the CPR, and again, it didn't seem like it was effective. The paramedics arrived, the police arrived, and they took over. And again, Cory and I were just, didn't know what in the world was happening and why this had happened.
Yeah.
Just praying out loud to the Lord to intervene and save Micah's life. the paramedics worked on him for quite a while, and I just was kind of freaking out because I knew nothing was changing and that he was still being worked on.
Mm.
So they said they needed to transport him immediately to the hospital. They seemed very concerned. So I jumped in the ambulance. Cory got in the police car, and we headed down to Children's Hospital. And I so vividly remember in the paramedics, the ambulance just praying out loud, Lord, save him. Please, Lord Jesus. And the driver of the ambulance was so kind and was actually praying with me and kept saying, Heather, I'm pleading with the Lord to save Micah as well. So that was such a comfort. We ended up getting to Children's Hospital in the ER, and the head doctor, who we actually had met a couple nights previously, just briefly, was angry, was just out of sorts. Like, what in the world? Why is this happening? What's going on? Just didn't understand. They still had not gotten any airway or breathing or a heartbeat back.
Oh, wow.
So I would say they were working on him for a good 25, 30 minutes total. And they came into the room and told us that there was nothing more they could do. So we needed to come in to say goodbye. And in that time, that head doctor yelled out, I have a heartbeat. I have a heartbeat. And they were able to get that back, and they had intubated him. So he was on the breathing machine.
Yeah.
So I knew, working in the healthcare field, that he had been without oxygen and a heartbeat for over a half an hour.
Oh, wow.
Cory had that sense of, oh, he's back. He didn't have that background. So he was really quite thrilled and hopeful that this was a road to recovery. Yeah. In the next 12 hours, they had done MRIs and more testing to see what damage he had, and he was pretty much pronounced brain dead, that they were not able to save him.
Oh, gosh.
So we had to make the decision to take him off life support. And
I'm so sorry that you guys had to make a decision like that.
Yeah, it was really hard. So in the matter of those 3 days, he had gone from a healthy 9-month-old to having to say goodbye and having to go back home without our child.
Oh, wow.
Which was just unbelievable to us.
Yeah. So in the course of those 3 days with all of those medical professionals seeing Micah, it never occurred to anybody to check to see if he had aspirated something?
Yeah, and that's where we kind of ended up having to take it a couple steps further and doing some research on, was this medical malpractice?
Yeah.
But yes, it was determined that sign of a cough, that barking seal cough, is a sign of aspiration, and that he should have been scoped. They should have scoped and gotten the food particle off of his lung. They had confirmed that there was a particle, and that's what had caused the pneumonia. And then also they had determined that food particle, he had coughed up on that Sunday morning. He had gotten it loose away from his lung, and it blocked his airway completely. And that's ended up killing him or losing total oxygen to his brain. So, yes, we had to go through the grueling 1.5 years of trying to fight with the doctors and the hospital. So why did you make this decision on not to remove that item?
Can you tell us a little bit more about that, about how that process went and what the final decisions were and all of that?
Yeah. Well, this was one of the many lessons, perhaps, that we take to this day from our son's death. And also, I think perhaps a lot of the listeners of your podcast could relate to, in terms of having a more sober realization of the limits of human intelligence and professionalism and interaction.
Sure.
Right? There's only so much, even under modern medical technology and knowledge, that we know of. Right. And so, I think that at that point in time, the medical professionals would have said that it's not our standard procedure that when there's a foreign object that we're going to scope every time, because the concerns at that point in time with a young child were that the risks of adverse results from scoping were greater than the benefit of taking out the foreign object, partly because the foreign object will often disintegrate or cause no harm. And so the medical reasoning at the time was that there would be no scope. Well, that our case demonstrated that that was an error, that there is fatal risk associated with failing to take precaution. So through the subsequent interaction from the legal system, it's under our understanding that the standard medical procedure for situations like this has changed. It begs the broader question, as it relates to our interaction and our belief in the Lord and God. How can you allow this to happen?
Yeah.
And that's something that, at least for Heather and I, being Bible-believing Christians from the beginning, something that we would have stated, but until such time that it happens to you, do you really believe it? Now the rubber meets the road. Do you really believe what you say you do? And so, in the course of this, his passing and the grief following that, the Lord kept us true. He kept faith. He allowed us to continue to have faith in him through these difficult times. And while we think that from the legal perspective, there was a change for the better in terms of the medical standard of care that was changed by reason of this, that in itself is certainly not sufficient to make up for the loss of our son.
No.
And so, we trust that God has many great purposes for our son's life, and this is just one of many. And continue to go back to a faith and a trust in the goodness of God, even when we can't see the purposes that he's working, right? To trust in a good and holy God, even when we don't know many, certainly not all, of the purposes that he's accomplishing on this side of eternity.
Yeah, that is so true, Cory. And it's not what you would have wanted. It's another evidence of how God, in the middle of something that's so tragic and so traumatic to parents, how God can take that and turn it for good, potentially for other children and other parents down the road, because of those changes that were made to standard medical procedure when situations like that arise. I mean, I know from y'all's perspective, you're thinking there had to have been a better way, but there are things that you guys know quite well we don't have all the answers to, and we want on this side of heaven. That's part of faith, trusting what we can't see. Going back to your story, so, and either of you guys jump in here, or both of you, after all of that is behind you, you've got, you guys had a funeral to plan that you never thought you would have to do, and all the other legal aspects that go along with that. And at some point, the people that are in our lives that step forward and are so gracious and compassionate and loving, when something like that happens, eventually they kind of go back to their normal routines. So let's kind of pick up at that point. We're probably several weeks or a few months into it. So what do your lives look like at this point?
Yeah, I would say we had a few people that just showed up for us and that would just come to our house and care for us, bring us meal, and we had meals forever. People just bringing stuff that we didn't think we needed.
Yeah.
So that was such a blessing. But yes, when that kind of all faded away, it was really grueling. It was, I had quit my job and to care for Micah, and now I had nothing. I had a quiet household, nothing to do really. And that was just grueling for me to have to navigate. And I just remember thinking each day, I don't know how I'm going to get through this day. I don't know how I can manage another day. And I just would always go back to that song, day by day.
Right.
He gives you enough energy or sustaining grace to make it through each day. And he truly did. I mean, the physical, emotional, and spiritual exhaustion from just navigating grief in those early days were so hard. But by the grace of God, we got through. We managed.
We were blessed with a few mentors, some folks who came to us who themselves had lost children. And I think of the passage out of 2 Corinthians 1, where God comforts us in our affliction so that we can comfort those who will perhaps go through similar affliction.
Yeah.
So certain family friends and actually a pastor couple who had lost their daughter in 1987, I believe, many years previously, for years, have been mentoring couples like us, came alongside of us and helped us. And I think that there was a lot of well-meaning people, especially in our church. The church we were going to at the time was a solid church, and yet there was a lot of sort of intimations that we should behave in a certain way, and that I should have sort of a biblical sing-songy approach and like a Sunday school type answer, and that didn't sit well with me on several occasions. And I think there was a lot of anger that needed to be worked out in my own heart. And so we were blessed in our case with believing, grieving parents who could come alongside of us. Pastor John Piper would say there are some words for the wind. In other words, there's some anger things that come out that you just let them go into the wind, and then you sit like a good friend would sit with somebody in their anger and their grief and their sadness, and don't try to make yourself feel better by saying things that you think should be said. So we were blessed in that regard. And I know that some of the grieving parents that we interact with, that's not necessarily the case. But in our case, that was certainly the case.
Yeah. That is a blessing. Let's talk about that just for a minute. So I think this is something that a lot of people struggle with, particularly when you're the parents who have lost a child. You feel very singled out. Like you're suddenly those parents, and nobody knows what to do with you. Sometimes the church doesn't know what to do because nobody gets trained on this. We don't go into this prepared for it, because it's really not natural for parents to bury their children. So we don't come with an instruction book. So tell us a little bit about what you saw people do, like the ones you just referred to, that was right and that was helpful in that process, versus what things that we know aren't so helpful. Can y'all talk about that?
Yeah, I think you realize who the people are that are going to walk alongside you and who are going to really hold you up and be there for you. Certain friends that we thought were going to show up and be there for us didn't know how to deal with us, didn't know what to say, didn't know how to comfort us. And that was a little bit shocking to us. But now it's understandable that, people just don't know what to do and to say, and it hurts them to think about the pain that we're going through.
Right.
So they kind of remove themselves from us. So yeah, that was a little bit hard, was to just realize that there's some people that would just kind of go away, and kind of expect us to quickly carry on.
Yeah.
We felt like we needed to be proactive, even with our help. I had suffered some post-traumatic stress
Sure.
with Micah's passing. So we immediately got into counseling, trying to find a good biblical counselor that would help us. And just engaged ourselves with people that had the same experience. I needed somebody to talk to that understood my depth of pain. So like Cory had mentioned, just getting involved more intimately with these people that we had just met that had, or have known for a while, that had gone through grief themselves, was really helpful. But
that makes all the difference if they can actually empathize with you because they've been there. Because as try as they might, people that are otherwise well-intentioned and want to help, if they haven't lived it, they really don't know what to say or what to do very often. And some of them try really hard, but sometimes it makes it even worse. And I don't know about you guys, but what we found was one of the things that was most meaningful and helpful to us is just people who gave us the gift of their presence and didn't try to offer Band-Aids for that big gaping wound that we both were dealing with. Was that pretty much true for you guys?
Yeah, I don't know what words to say, friend, but I'll be here for you.
Yeah.
Right. I haven't been through this, but I am here to offer my friendship. I'm here to offer my time to mow your lawn or to fix your sink.
Yeah.
But I don't know the words to say, and I'm just sorry.
Yeah. Don't you appreciate that kind of honesty in a situation like that?
Yes.
Yeah.
So much. Yeah.
You know, guys, when you experience a loss like this, you know, we learn a lot about grief that we didn't know before. What would you guys say that you have learned about grief on this side of it that you didn't know prior to losing Micah?
For me, it was really an total dependence on the Lord.
Yeah.
Like, to get through the day, to constantly submit and to give up my fears, and just navigating grief was just totally submission, hour by hour, to the Lord, that he has a plan for me, and had a plan with all of this, that it was not out of his control, but just the depth of my dependence on the Lord to make it through each day. I mean, there was days that I felt like, just take me, Lord, just let me go home. But those moments after his death, it's hard to explain, but your dependence on him is total. I mean, like, I gave it all to him, and just to know that my faith and my trust in God would grow so much, and just be all, all to God, was pretty amazing to me. And I look back on that time, and it was awful. It was the hardest thing I've ever had to deal with, and still is. But my faith has grown so much in that.
And that's it. What I'm hearing you say is that's where you found your hope, was in your relationship with the Lord.
Yeah. I'm so grateful as her husband that that's where her hope is.
Absolutely.
As Peter confesses to Jesus, to whom else can we go, Lord? You have the words of eternal life. There's nobody else to whom we can go. And so that's our hope, that in sharing our story, that others are likewise pointed to the only true hope in sin and grief and loss.
Right.
Similarly, in terms of learning experience, it seems to me that interacting with others, especially believers, Christians, that the central narrative, the story of our life, is so centered around how God works through suffering, through setback, through whether the loss of a child, financial setback, divorce, other difficult things, that God is working through our weakness to demonstrate himself strong. That it just seems like we have the freedom and the joy of knowing that God has written the story for us on the cross, and that we have the freedom to know that whether we die tomorrow or we are successful and meet our goals professionally or as a family, it's already been done on the cross, and that frees us up to know that we can have the joy in participating in a relationship with God. That doesn't mean that we're not grieving the loss of our son, but at the same time, it does free us up knowing that our story has already been written. So I would say that the focus, at least for me, has been in even interacting with other grieving dads in particular, that seems like the central focus of our life just kind of comes back to how God worked through suffering.
Yeah, absolutely. And something you said a moment ago, I want to go back to when you talked about joy, because that might be a foreign concept for somebody who's listening today, because they're in a very fresh season of grief, and they're still in that maybe that state of shock and trauma. You referred, Heather, a minute ago to having some level of PTSD, which is not uncommon for parents who have lost a child. There are also other physical symptoms that show up, and even a diagnosis now known as prolonged grief disorder, where it's just, you can't, some parents just cannot get past the focus on the child's death back to a focus again on the child's life. And that can be a really tough transition. But I want us to talk a little bit about the fact that it's a reality that through a relationship with Jesus, that we can be on our grief journey, and on that grief journey, coexisting with it, we can experience joy, and we can begin to experience meaning and purpose again in our lives. And from a cultural view, that seems like sort of a foreign concept.
Yeah, if life is based on circumstances, and if our identity is wrapped around our kids, it would be very inappropriate for us to express joy if we've lost our children.
Absolutely.
And yet, God is the one who's writing the story in the length of our days.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just recall pondering the word happy right after he died, and even a year later, just, I don't know if I'll ever be happy again.
Yeah.
But yet that joy that we have in knowing that the Lord has redeemed this all, and that it'll all be made new and right at someday. That is what brings us the joy. Yeah. But those silly words on happy, and the other word was miss. I miss Micah. I just hated that word. It didn't even express the depth of my sorrow and miss. It's just this deep longing for your child.
Absolutely. When you're experiencing something as traumatic as the loss of a child, sometimes there just literally aren't any adequate words in our language to express what you were just saying, Heather, about missing your child, the depth of how much you miss them and how much you love them. It's just totally inadequate. And I'm so glad that you touched on the whole concept of happiness and joy, because I think those, in our culture, those two tend to be almost synonymous, and they're not. Happiness is very circumstantial, and it's based more on our emotional state, which can fluctuate multiple times every day, sometimes within the hour. But joy, as you guys have just expressed, it's something that only can come through a relationship with Jesus. And it's more of a steady state perspective on life. You have joy that can coexist in the midst of grief. And that's what I'm hearing from you guys. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. That deep hope, and knowing that this will not be forever.
Exactly.
This pain will be redeemed.
Right.
Yeah. I have the blessing, not of my own strength. I say this because of what God has done, but to take a few favorite worship songs and sing at a cemetery. From a secular perspective, how can you sing at a cemetery? It is because we have joy and hope.
Well said. Well said. Let's touch on one other thing that I think sometimes people that are listening, again, in a fresh season of grief, you wonder, because you hear the statistics sometimes about the impact that the loss of a child has on a marriage and on the family. So you guys, how old were your other children when you lost Micah?
So Micah was our first born.
Okay.
So we did not have any other children.
Okay.
But the story of our second child is, we can look at and kind of laugh, but it was really hard because we found out a month after we had lost Micah that we were pregnant again. And it was in quite disbelief that could happen. Even my doctor was like, I don't know how this is possible. You've gone through fertility for, issues for the last 2 years. You had multiple miscarriages, and now you're in this deep grief. How in the world could you be pregnant? So miraculously, we found out that we were pregnant. And again, it was the grace of God. I mean, I could barely eat. I could barely function. And somehow he grew this child in me to continue, to give us children and to bless us. But it was a real struggle at first, just because, God had just taken away Micah.
Yeah.
And now he's created this new life in me that I just couldn't wrap my head around, and I couldn't understand his plan. But again, it was a trust, and it was a submission to, okay, Lord, I don't know your ways. I know they're greater than what I can imagine, but we trusted, and the Lord gave us 3 more children after Micah,
that is
quite quickly, within several years.
Yeah.
So we look as that now is just God's way of blessing us and loving on us.
Yeah.
Because that was our heart's desire, was to be able to have a family and to have children.
Wow.
So it didn't take away that pain and that grief of losing Micah.
Yeah.
It added another dimension, and, some difficulty with subsequent children, just to be able to trust the Lord that they will live past 9 months, and that something else might, could happen that would take them. So,
absolutely.
Many continued levels of just giving it over to the Lord and trust.
Right. That's one of those daily things that you have to do, right?
Yep. It is.
So what have you guys done over the course of the years to help your other 3 children learn about Micah, to keep his memory alive, even though they didn't know him? So what's that been like?
We've been intentional about continuing birthdays and celebrations. With Micah, we often visit the cemetery, and our children actually say they like to go, which is interesting. Yeah. But yes, we will go and honor him, and birthdays, celebrations, death dates.
Yeah. And I think even ahead of this podcast, as we were talking about, speaking with you, Greg, about this morning, I mean, just the point of emphasis to say, we grieve Micah's passing, but Owen, Brendan, Kinsley, we are so glad that you're in our lives, right? That we love you, and while we grieve, we are so blessed by you. So I'd like to think that it's helpful for them in terms of understanding in eternity, and that we're not immune from suffering, and that we trust in a God who uses suffering for good.
That is so wise. And so now I'm sure they feel like they know Micah, even though they never met him. That is awesome. And that's one of the things that I hear it consistently with so many parents that have lost a child, because we've done some of the same things. You celebrate their birthdays, and there's not a day that goes by that we don't talk about Ryan in some way, shape, or form.
Right.
We laugh at him. We laugh about him because we know that he would be doing the same if he was standing right here with us.
Yes.
Yeah,
That's right.
yeah, because they never cease to be a part of your life. And that's something that I think kind of gets missed in our culture. So, guys, I think I already know the answer to this, but, statistics tell us, well, let me back up. People think that statistics bear out that after the loss of a child, that it often has a very negative impact on a marriage, and a lot of those marriages end in divorce. When if you actually do the research, statistics show that fewer marriages that have suffered the loss of a child end in divorce. It's the divorce rate is actually, from all that I've read, somewhere between 16 and 20%, depending upon the study that you read. Whereas in the general population and even within the church community, it stands at about 49 to 50%. So having said all of that, what was the impact on your marriage? Because there are people listening right now that are probably very concerned about what's going to happen to theirs.
Yes, we were actually told that statistic, that you have a high rate of divorce, given that you've lost a child. So that kind of freaked us out initially. And I mean, you can see why. There's issues that it brings up, and even just the whole fact that Cory wasn't there when Micah had fallen, and he could have put some blame on me or blame on anybody else. But we decided right away to get involved in the biblical counseling together as a couple.
Good.
And that was really helpful for us. And I continued to have my therapy for my post-traumatic stress. So that was also helpful. But I feel like we did well grieving together. Like, we needed each other. Like, nobody else understood all of it other than Cory.
Yeah.
I mean, he knew everything. I mean, he felt the same pain. He just totally understood. And I felt like even times that, I mean, I would be so exhausted from grieving and crying, and at those times he would be solid and okay and be able to almost preach to me or give me comfort. And then he would get home from work and he would grieve. And then I was, we would just hold each other up and get us through those days. And I just felt like that was such a blessing to be able to have somebody that, first of all, understood the depth of my pain, and then would just be able to carry me and be there for me when I needed it at all times. So we actually felt like we grew closer together. I felt like, and thankfully there was not any blaming, or we just laid that on the table and got, said this wasn't going to be part of us as blame. We trusted that the Lord had chosen this path for Micah, and we just needed to go forward with that rather than dwelling on the whys and the what ifs too.
Right. So. Because those are questions that you eventually realize you're never going to get the answers to. Oh. I mean, you just not on this side of heaven. But how wise of you guys to lean into each other instead of away from each other. Wisdom in choosing to go to counseling. Some people don't, some people do, but my wife and I did that as well. We went to a counselor for probably 3.5 years, and it helped us in understanding what the other was going through, because even though we have a lot of commonalities in the way that we grieve as men and women, moms and dads, there's still differences.
Right.
So very much wisdom there in doing what you guys did. I do want to give you guys an opportunity to talk a little bit about the ministry that God used you guys to start sometime after you lost Micah. So tell us a little bit about that and how people can connect with you guys with that ministry.
Yeah. Well, it was December of the year 2009 that we lost Micah. Micah died in July of 2009. In December of that year, we had been receiving and collecting honorariums, memorial gifts, and we wondered what we should do with that money. And I'll give credit to you, Heather. I think this was your idea to kind of use the secular term, but pay it forward. Use that money to buy care packages for recently bereaved parents, because I guess I'm a reader, and I jumped into reading books on grief and how what Scripture says about that. So I appreciated those care packages. So we thought we would take that money and establish a nonprofit ministry just to mainly send out care packages.
Okay.
So we started it out as a 501c3 called the Micah Wessman Foundation. It's now called Hope for the Mourning. Hope for the Mourning. Mourning as in crying. Hope for the Mourning. The suggestion being that our hope, even in the midst of great grief, is our hope in Jesus Christ. So our ministry starts, or the introduction to our ministry is, if folks have lost children, we would be glad to send them a care package that includes books from a biblical perspective, written from a biblical perspective on grieving in Christ. And so that's kind of the background, the story. Since that time, we're blessed to have started a few Zoom support groups. There's a men's group that I lead that we're going through Randy Elkhorn's Heaven book right now as we look forward to heaven. So that's just been a very rewarding experience in terms of being involved with parents. And then speaking a little bit to, the things we've spoken about with you this morning, Greg, about different phases and grief and kind of the anger and disbelief and recovery, and even issues with marriages that we're blessed to be a part of. So, if there are folks who are listening who would be interested in receiving a care package from us, you can just go to our hopeforthemourning.com website and request a care package, and we can send you a care package.
Oh, wow.
And I will say we do include gift cards for restaurants, because we felt like having meals and just gift cards from people were just so helpful, just to go out to dinner and to be able to take that time just to connect one-on-one and not have to have the burden of making a meal. So we do include gift cards. We also include some resources on some local ministries that we support, such as Smile Again Ministries, a retreat center in northern Minnesota that really focuses on biblical counseling as well. We also open the opportunity in those care packages for people to reach out to us if they have questions or want kind of more connection with somebody. Also counseling facilities, grief share in their area. So we try to provide as much information as the recipient wants, that we can continue on a relationship with them as well. So,
man, that is such good stuff. Thank you guys for all that you're doing. Tell the listeners again how they can get in touch with you guys.
Yes, it's the website is www.hopeforthemourning, all one word, .com.
MOURING.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So there's a tab there, contact me and request a care package.
That's great. Now, if somebody wants to get involved with financial support, would they still use that same web address?
Yes. There's a donation button there in the top right-hand corner, I believe, of the website.
Okay, great.
Yeah, we say it's about $120 per care package that we send out. So we have some people sponsor a care package for somebody else, or even multiple care packages. So we so appreciate those donations too, that we can keep reaching out to newly bereaved families, parents.
Man, you guys are doing such good work. Thank you on behalf of other more grieving parents out there that will be connected and have been connected with you guys. And I got to tell you, I know of somebody right now who has a ministry, and they are interested in doing something very similar to what you guys are doing. So I'm going to try to make that connection for both of you.
Thank you. And Greg, thank you for your ministry, just in terms of sharing stories. And I just agree wholeheartedly with the approach that you're taking with encouraging the telling of stories and sharing of stories, because it's through those stories that, we connect with the broader meta-narrative of God's redemptive story in our lives, and God's working through the greatest seemingly calamity of all time, which is the crucifixion of Christ and his subsequent resurrection. So that meta-narrative impacting us in our grief and the sharing of those stories. So thank you.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Cory. Cory and Heather, it has been such a pleasure and such a blessing to spend some time with you guys this morning. And I just will continue to pray that you guys continue touching lives far beyond your ability to reach them.
Thank you, Greg.
Thank you, Greg. Yeah, thank you.
If you find our podcast meaningful, we invite you to follow us so that you can automatically receive the latest episodes. Also, we'd like to invite you to contact us and talk with us about sharing your story on a future episode, because every story is important and matters to God. Please reach out via email at hope@emptychairendeavor.com. That's hope@emptychairendeavor.com. And as always, thank you so much for listening